out my collar. Excuse me. We have the Daily Mail, and I did it with the right hand as well. 4 pals who went camping and never came home. Very sad story. Hunt bows to Tory demands for tax cuts in bid to revive the economy. That's The Guardian. The Mirror. Back to those camping boys. So tragic. Camping pals horror. The Times. Hunt offers... That's the image. There we go. Hunt offers tax cuts for workers and businesses. The Sun. Back to those lads so young. And Kate, they're emerging from a car with her legs. And the Daily Star. Never mind the Cliff Richard. That is a Sex Pistols reference. It's lost on me. Those were your front pages. So we are starting with the Daily Mail, Leo, and a very sad story, which I have to say I've only just become aware of. Yeah,
it's absolutely tragic. So the 4 pals who went camping have been missing for a couple of days. It turns out their car flipped and was laying undiscovered for 48 hours. Yeah. And they're dead. It's terrible. Like 4 young men, just on the sort of cusp of manhood, and cut short, when they're out doing something that would have been, such a fun thing to do.
Absolutely, an activity you want to encourage young people to do. Get out there into Snowdonia, which is, God, I had some of my happiest memories of that time of my life around there. Yeah. Not much else to say about it, is there?
No, it's tragic. I don't think it should be a story that stops people doing things like this. It is one of those tragic, unfortunate happenings, Yeah,
you've just got to recognise that driving in that part of the world, and I'm not for one moment suggesting that they were careless, but it is slightly treacherous, and just take care. But for goodness sake, don't stop young men looking into the countryside. The Guardian, Steve.
Well, many stories on their front page. We can talk about Netanyahu. They cover this. Says the deal is close on hostages. Not giving away a lot of information. Joe Biden's in the article as well, refusing to give away a lot of information. Interestingly saying it's not done till it's done. No. A deal is being done to get some of the hostages back. It's 50 hostages, releasing 150. I know some places will be discussing the ratio. There's a bit in the story I did think stands out. It says here, any deal would be significant propaganda coup for Hamas. And it's also a propaganda coup for Netanyahu, isn't it? I mean, like, as soon as this the tragic event happened, William Hague was writing about it, saying that is this trying to tempt Netanyahu into having a strong response, and then you can vilify Israel as the brute of the region. But this is a negotiation. This is getting hostages back. This is showing that you can do the negotiation. Surely it's a propaganda coup for Netanyahu?
I don't know that anyone can claim a propaganda coup for the last month. It's been so horrific, month and a half now. 150 Palestinian prisoners. I mean, that seems they have been bought at an extraordinarily high price, if that's what it was about. I've struggled, to be honest, to make any kind of sense of it, other than possibly what people said initially, which is that Hamas are hoping to destabilise the ongoing normalisation of relationships between Saudi and Israel. But that didn't seem to happen at all. I mean, that was the dog that didn't bark at all, wasn't it, in a way? So
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fuss initially, but I think long term, as years go by, there's not going to be any of the destruction of the bonds between Israel and the Arab countries and the Gulf countries.
I don't think so. The ones that have got a functional state and see their future as being part of a functional community do not want to be destabilised by these mad dogs, in paragliders, do they? I mean, it's like, who would want to kind of ally yourself to that? And Hezbollah seem to have fizzled out as well. So
yeah, but if you listen to ministers in Jordan, ministers across the Middle East, they're more aware of the dangers of Islamism than politicians in the West are.
It's a really good point, because that's exactly why Egypt has refused to open its border, of course. And you might say, well, why don't they allow them in from Gaza?
Look what happened to Lebanon.
Exactly. They've all seen it coming now, and that's not the future that they want. And a lot of people actually have written about this at length, about how Islamic countries, as you say, are harder on the fundamentalists and the I suppose the only other thing you could conceivably say is that it has exposed possibly some kind of gap in sentiment between the authorities, between the states, the rulers in countries like ours, and great masses of people. And we've all learned that there are different sympathies. Maybe 10, 20 years ago that would have been slightly different. I don't know if that's an advantage to anyone.
I think from a sheer numbers game, we've got 4 or 5 million Muslims in this country. I'm not saying all Muslims support the Palestinian cause, or it's delineated as cleanly as that, but it kind of is, and there's, what, 300, 400,000 Jews?
Yeah.
So just, sheer weight of numbers, that's an imbalance. And it's weird that, we sort of, we treat Muslims globally as a minority when there's almost 2 billion Muslims, and there's
huge growth in the last few years.
15 million Jews. It's a tiny proportion.
An extraordinarily stable population for the last few years, thank goodness. But they make such an extraordinary contribution, I suppose, that it's sometimes you forget how tiny that number is. So anyway, that's hopefully moving into, goodness, I don't want to call it the beginning of the end, but maybe the end of the beginning. What are we looking at now? The Daily Star.
Oh, we've got the Times to do.
Oh, we've got the Times. Sorry, we haven't done the Times yet. Sorry, I'm moving on. How to spice up your marriage, Leo.
Is that what you do? By Fergie.
Wow. Fergie, so I should imagine there's some toe sucking involved there, which is rather disgusting for anybody with a fungal foot infection. But I'm sure she doesn't. I'm sure she's got a fantastic podiatrist.
She was very good at flirting with Cliff the other day on the telly. They
really?
showed that clip earlier where he's putting his foot in it about
literally putting his foot in it.
In terms of a will they, won't they? If Cliff's involved, won't they? They're not going to do that.
That's a nightmarish vision to stay with us tonight.
They're both sets of bones creaking like an armada.
Like a maracas going on.
Both taking turns to go up in the stairlift. But we've got on the Times, we've got Jeremy Hunt to cut business tax and national insurance. This is apparently to revive the economy. So don't make me laugh. This is to revive the Tory party.
Maybe election hopes.
Maybe give them an extra 1%, so they get beaten by 39% instead of 40%.
I mean, we said this when because we were all doing this show when the Truss Mayfly briefly floated into existence and was gobbled up, caught on the long sticky tongue of Sunak and swallowed whole.
We're back to Cliff Richard.
I remember when they were saying, and Hunt was like, this is the most brutal tax regime of my lifetime.
Yeah.
And it cannot possibly last until the next election. It would be a suicide note. I've got a feeling they've left it too long as it is. I mean, I don't think people are going to forget the pain that they've been put through here. And even though Truss obviously did, Kwasi Kwarteng's budget did destabilise the markets, it would have been an extraordinarily better regime for me to live under. I can't be the only one who's thinking that.
It's a stickiness of the message problem. So this government did spend billions giving us money off our electricity bills. But what they didn't do is send you a cheque. So it's just been sunk in. If they'd have actually done it, we ought to have sat here and done our funny
Even
bit
just
about...
vouchers with a picture of some electricity on it.
Yeah, and then you'd think, oh, look what they spent. But that money is absolutely wasted in terms of, good credit for the government.
As it was under the pandemic, of course, because people get used to it so quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the problem. We got this new Argentinian guy talking about it in Argentina. The problem with socialism is that it just ratchets all the time. People never go, oh, that's nice, I'm getting something for nothing.
Yeah.
They now think, well, that seems to work. I'll just carry on getting something for nothing.
And also, it's like boiling the frog. We've seen over the past decades, every Western country has seen the share of GDP that's spent by the state just gradually increase, gradually ratchet up, as you say. Yeah. And so eventually, you reach a point where the state controls the entire economy and you're basically a communist.
Yeah, and everybody just begins to treat it like a de facto parent.
Yeah.
It's very, very sick. Finally, we do get onto the Star, and I am longing to hear what explains this headline.
Never mind the Cliff Richard, he's actually had sex with Fergie. And what? No, thankfully, punk legends the Sex Pistols were secret fans of Sir Cliff, even though he described their music as a racket. I mean, Cliff also was a bit.
I believe that's true. I mean, the Sex Pistols, for a start, had no consensus about music. Johnny Lydon was a very smart guy, a proper kind of... rebel, situationist. He was interested in the sort of the rest of them were just like clutterheads, weren't they? I mean,
well, Glenn Matlock was a pretty smart guy, and was actually a lot more.
He was the songwriter.
Yeah. Well, he wrote some of the songs. Then he was booted. I think he was booted out.
Yeah.
But the Steve Jones, they all had a real pop sensibility. So I can imagine them liking, the Beach Boys and Cliff Richard and stuff like that.
Cliff Richard, though, is pretty tame.
She's a devil. Come on, she's just a devil woman.
Oh, you're thinking 70s Cliff.
Come on, who wouldn't want to be wired for sound
anymore? Yeah. It was the way he danced. That was the thing that really turned my stomach.
Have you tried to dance on rollerblades?
Wired for sound.
All you've got.
No, it was awful. Truly dreadful. I know that the very, very early record, literally just one called Rock and Roll or something, Rock and Roll They just can't use it no matter what they say. They just don't know what's going to replace it. Sorry. Young ones, though, they brought him back into fashion, didn't they? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
The young ones, yes.
Yeah.
So I guess that was a Pistols kind of adjacent milieu. Oh, well, I'm not sure it's worthy of a headline, but we've chewed as much juice as we're going to get out of it. That is it. That's part one. Rishi supports tough sentences, such as this one, with 3 subordinate clauses, one of which, if with the wrong emphasis, would ruin everything. That's coming up in the second section. See you shortly.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GBNews.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. I'm Simon Evans, still joined by Leo Kearse and Steve N. Allen. I neglected to insert your initial before. Hopefully that hasn't undermined your
I'm
brand
still
or
here.
whatever. Yeah. People get confused. Who was the famous Steve Allen?
Is it the Irish guy?
No, he's the guy who invented The Tonight Show, the comedian.
The comedian,
Oh, yeah.
yes. That's
I'm thinking
right,
of Dave Allen.
Dave Allen, yeah. That's more mine.
We're live on telly, by the way. Are you aware of this?
Leo, let's get started on some news. The Independent. Rishi gets tough on Just Stop Oil, a bit like he did on immigration, I suspect.
Yeah. So Rishi Sunak has hit back at criticism from a United Nations expert over long sentences handed to 2 Just Stop Oil protesters. So this is Morgan Trollen and Marcus Decker, were jailed for 3 years and 2 years and 7 months, respectively, after they used ropes and climbing gear to scale the Queen Elizabeth II bridge, which caused gridlock when and the police had to close it to get them down. So, I mean, it seems fair enough. Finally, the criminal justice system is starting to deal with Just Stop Oil, because they stop people earning money, they cause people immense distress, they stop ambulances getting to hospital, and at some point, somebody's going to get killed. You know, somebody's going to get run over by a bus, then it'll be tragic. Because
somebody will lose their temper to such an extraordinary extent with them that there'll be a serious GBH charge, which I think would be a terrible thing as well.
Exactly. Then you'd have two victims, really. And we saw in Panama last week a man pulled out a gun and shot two environmental protesters.
Right?
Was he a lawyer?
Middle-class American lawyer, retired lawyer down in Panama, and he just does it incredibly casually as well.
But I want to know why the United Nations is raising issues like this with ministers in the UK. They've either got too many staff that they're looking around for stuff to meddle in, which is the problem with a lot of public sector organisations. I mean, the United Nations guy, he says he's worried about the freedom of expression and freedom of peaceful assembly and association. It's like, why are you getting involved in
the UN is a classic example of, I think it is Conquest Second Law, that any organisation or institution not explicitly right-wing in its aims will drift left over the course of its lifetime. The UN started out with the best of intentions, but it's become essentially indistinguishable from Stonewall now. It's just a meddling bunch of leftist... I'm not going to use a...
Meanwhile, over to Steve to bring balance. Great. What a teeing up that is. These leftists... No, I think Rishi is at least wrong in how he justifies this. So I don't know what the length of sentence should be, but I do know this as a fact. Protesting isn't a crime, so the sentence you should get is for the crime that you committed, which is stopping and blocking a road. So whether you're doing it shouting oil or doing it not shouting anything, you should get the same sentence. So when Rishi says it's entirely right for the selfish protesters intent on causing misery to face tough sentences, it's entirely right for people who block a road to get the sentence you get for blocking a road. Sorry, that doesn't
come... Intent and motivation is a huge factor of the...
But protesting is not a crime, but doing it on the top of on the QE2 bridge
it's a bit
is.
like hate crimes or something, isn't it? It adds a new dimension to it, which allows them to expand the sentencing. You won't... I mean, this is why you have judges. Otherwise, it could all be just done by AI. You know,
one day
they look. I'm quite sure you're right, but I do think I will say, as a sort of devil's advocate, I think possibly it's a classic example of the judicial system failing to act quickly enough and now overcorrecting its course. Very similar to the Savile case, followed up with all the Utri investigations, in which the historical cases were blighted, their lives were blighted unnecessarily because they failed to act at the appropriate time. Times now, Steve. Student societies working for China. At least they're working anyway.
Student societies at British universities are working for China. They've got societies linked to Beijing, which are posing as normal student associations, but actually they're harassing pro-Hong Kong democracy activists and shutting down dissent. And, I mean, it seems unnecessary because when you're a student, you dabble with communism anyway. It's one of the things. Try a threesome, you read Marx. For me, sadly, as a chemist, no threesome, and it was Howard Marx.
Very
Finally
good.
became a hazard.
Marx was absolutely part of my student days as well, Mr. Nice Guy. I will say this, though. I don't think... I mean, it's interesting. They are still called technically the Chinese Communist Party, and they've always said it was Marxism with Chinese character. It's fascism now, isn't it? It's corporate. It's corporate state ownership. It's state corporatism. It's not anything to do with communism. China hasn't been for...
That's the problem with communist countries. It ends up not being anything to do with communism. That's the fundamental flaw.
But I mean, this shows they've learnt the lessons of when they were a communist. When the lessons they learned, sort of inculcating these ideas in the youth, and they really, in the West, we totally take our eye off the ball with young people. We let all these nefarious ideas spring out of the universities, like critical race theory, all this nonsense gender ideology, whereas the Chinese are in there paying to seed these messages to destabilise the West and also strengthen China.
Well, it's Aristotle, the give me the boy until he's 7, I'll give you the man.
It was the Jesuits. Ignatius Loyola.
They never put
I thought my daughter, who is 19, still not a man, but she's only in her first year yet, and she's at King's University. And it's funny, and I just finished reading a book about C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. They were called the Inklings. They had this sort of informal society of English professors at Oxford. In the 1920s, almost exactly 100 years ago, the big dispute was whether any English literature after Chaucer was worth studying. Whether it was a viable academic subject. It was worth reading for enjoyment, but whether there was any sort of academic, grist to be properly chewed and demonstrate your skills. Now she's studying English, and it's mainly about sex, gender, diversity. She's reading Judith Butler. It's
Yeah.
extraordinary how these things kind of just constantly, and I'm not saying that's a Chinese plot, of course, but there is a degree to which all these sort of university courses have just moved further and further away from any kind of really, you know, chewy, like muscle and bone skeleton of academic discipline towards activism.
If it were up to me, you'd get rid of English courses anyway. Just you'll learn to read. You've done it.
Yeah.
Move on.
She's only there for the context. Guardian now, Leo, and the correlation between following lockdown rules and subsequent mental health. But I suspect we're probably all thinking the same thing, aren't we?
Yeah, so people who stuck by UK COVID rules have the worst mental health, says this survey. So some good news at last. So yeah, those who followed the restrictions most closely when the pandemic hit are the most likely to be suffering from stress, anxiety and depression. And they split people out into two different personality types. There's the communal personalities who are more caring, sensitive and aware of others' needs. And obviously they're all crying now. They're all depressed and anxious and stuff. And also they say there's the other type, the agentic personalities, or people who can wipe their own bum. They didn't follow the rules, and they're happy. They were happy then and they're happy now. But these communal personalities, socialists, you know, the low-earning, fat people mostly.
They did what they were told and now they're miserable.
They did what they're told and now they're miserable.
As the Smith song says.
Also it says, the researchers say they found it difficult to make the transition from receiving regular exhortations about following public health advice during the pandemic to no advice when the lockdown ended.
No,
so they couldn't deal with the lack of being told what to do.
But this is not new. This is textbook institutionalisation, isn't it? And it's exactly what happened. I know, I won't mention a name, but there was a comedian once who was in one of those kind of reality shows, a little bit like Big Brother, but it was one where you had to learn some skills like tap dancing or whatever. And when he was, and that was like a fortnight he was on there, you know. And you live in a sort of boarding school basically, and you get woken up every morning and you learn your, you know. And when it ended, he was like depressed. He had found that so much more reassuring than having to be responsible for his own life and decisions. You know?
Yeah, people don't want freedom.
And that's a comedian. I think it's a vastly more prevalent condition. You know, a lot of men say, a lot of people say that when are widowed, they struggle because somebody else, you know,
not telling them what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And it sounds ridiculous because but also there is I can't remember which book it is in. They say that the two main personality types are the dependent or the independent. That's what we think of, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's basically what these two are.
There is a third one, which is the interdependent, which is what you want to be. That's like basically when you knit your community together and yet maintain some degree of autonomy.
Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds, you know, sensible enough.
There's also anti-dependent, which is why a lot of my relationships haven't lasted. But,
Yeah.
But just to put a bit of balance on this one as well, the Tories didn't stick to lockdown rules and now they look miserable. So maybe there's more to this.
That's true, although that's because they're
about to lose an election.
Exactly. If they had another 3 years, they'd be fine. Talking of institutional, Steve, Daily Mail, it seems a certain amount of institutional bias at the BBC is becoming obvious, even to its former controller.
Yeah, ex-BBC Television Chief Brands Corporation, institutionally anti-Semitic. It's Danny Cohen. We actually covered it on the show a few weeks ago. He said this before. Now it says that an independent inquiry should look into it. And I agree, because it's difficult to know whether you've got three things. You've just got anti-Semitism of the people who work there, institutional anti-Semitism, or just bad journalism. And certainly in this article, there is some bad, terrible journalism. One of them was misreading a line from a Reuters report.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to try and do some sneaky institutional anti-Semitism, misreading stuff might not be your best way to manifest it. And they had to correct later. And the article brings up the thing about not calling Hamas terrorists. I can't believe this still needs to be gone through again.
Yeah.
It's a stupid rule, but it's not a rule where they've sat down at the BBC and gone, should we call Hamas terrorists? It's a stupid blanket rule that they shouldn't have, but it's a blanket rule.
But surely they should have some sort of common sense check. So when they're reading it, it just shows a BBC journalist, if they're reading out something saying, oh, the idea for targeting medical teams, they don't have a... You know, they think, oh, that's what people say in the staff room.
It might have been coming in through the ear, which you sometimes can find yourself saying nonsense if you've got something, you know, talking in your ear at the same time. I would give...
Would never happen.
I'll tell you what I have seen in the last couple of days, and you probably have as well, Jeremy Bowen suggesting that these are possibly hospital-issue AK-47s.
Yeah.
But, you know, that sort of thing. And again, it's fine to kind of go, we don't know for sure, but he seems to be going to extraordinary lengths to cast doubt.
And you'd think, because so Jeremy Bowen put forward the possibility that all the armaments they found in the hospital were for the hospital security, but surely then the hospital would have been able to keep Hamas out.
Yes, that's true, yeah. I still find it... I tend to agree with you by principle. These are not deliberate things. These are revealing, you know, institutional codes of practice and so on that need to be looked over, and
but I mean, some of them. When I worked at the BBC,
drift in the same direction. You begin to wonder, don't you?
But when I worked there was a rule about you don't go with the story until you get two independent sources confirming it. So even though if it were a misreading mistake, if you're reading it from two sources, you wouldn't misread it. You've got two different ways of writing it. So it just seems like there's bad practice and bad journalism, and maybe anti.
There was the book, I think it's called The Noble Lie. I think his name was Robin Aitken, who was ex-BBC Newsroom, wrote a book about the extent to which the BBC Newsroom, the Current Affairs Department, they don't lie, but they tend to focus on certain stories that they feel, play into the narrative that they want to sell you. And it's weird that it's come to light the extent to which there is more sympathy for Palestine than Israel in this conflict.
It ties into the whole woke culture of oppression, decolonisation.
I wouldn't have seen that coming, would you? I mean, if anything, I would have said, that there was, the historical oppression of the Jews would have counted for something. But apparently not.
People don't care about historical. It's anti-West, it's anti-civilisational, and obviously the BBC, being mainly made up of posh, educated wokeists, are going to be bang against it.
Last story for this half, Leah. Reassuring, we'll have to crack through this quickly. Reassuring news in the Telegraph. As it appears, I'm not going mad. The NHS is absolutely not the envy of the world, though maybe still of France.
So seeing a GP quickly is easier in Rwanda than Britain, according to this study. It's the worst place in the world, or the third worst place in the world for 24-hour and 7-day access to a family doctor. Just 35% of Britons were able to see a GP within 24 hours, compared to a global average of 67%. People in Rwanda had an 87% chance of seeing their doctor on the same day. And it wasn't a man in a grass skirt.
I've probably got access to more cutting-edge drugs as well.
Why would you all even think that? And also, in the UK, you've got the phone between 8 a.m. and 8:01 a.m. That's the only minute.
That's how it used to be. Now you don't even get that. You call. You're on hold to be told to use the internet.
Yes.
I've tried so much to see my GP, but all I can ever do is see a picture of him online and maybe call him. He's like a babe station.
No, it is extraordinarily dysfunctional. Although Canada and France are worse, and worse still, if you phone Canada, you get through to the GP and he gives you instructions on how to top yourself. So they have quite a lot to sort out.
Maybe that was just you. Maybe. Why are you calling from a +44 number? Top yourself.
That's part 2 done. In part 3, we have education reforms in Wales, rethinking the Black Death, and trans footy. We'll see you very shortly.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet?
What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Headliners. Telegraph now see the first glimmer of an enlightened education reform, and it's in Wales of all places.
Yes, they could have summer holidays cut to 4 weeks.
Yes.
But they're moving the weeks around.
That's fine, that's fine.
Is it? So look, I mean, the idea is they're spreading the holidays because the long break is really detrimental for those of a lower financial background. And you do this, you analyse it. You can get the kids almost up to the same level after the school holiday. It's the poorer kids who have dropped behind because the posh, the middle-class people are always like, oh, little Tarquin needs to go and have tuition.
They just don't even have books. I'm sorry, but they don't. A lot of homes don't have books, you know, and middle-class homes have books, even if it's only virtually signaling. They have books in the place.
But I don't read them because I've got a phone.
Jordan's written about 8 books, so let's not just love books. There's different kind of books.
What happens. And I remember the first time I encountered this fact was in a Malcolm Gladwell book.
Yeah.
And he talked about it, and he did some very interesting research, which may or may not have sort of stood up in the cold light of scrutiny, but about educational opportunities, in particular offered to poor black communities in Harlem and so on. There was one school which was a kind of template, I think, for the Michaela School, where basically underprivileged kids were given the opportunity to work really hard, and they have virtually no holidays. And these kids knew it would be a way out of the, you know, out of poverty. And
that's my problem with this story. Moving the week round's all very well, but surely they get enough. I mean, it's not like our kids are too clever. Oh, we've got to give them more holiday because look how clever they're being at the end of it.
Teachers, you know, the kids aren't going to rebel. It's the teachers. They take these jobs assuming they're going to get 13 weeks of holiday a year. You know, they are. I'm sorry, but they are an extraordinarily powerful union, the teachers, and we have to break them.
Yeah, and also, and also, it's going to make it harder to recruit them if it becomes more like a regular job where you have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Still finish at half-3.
Imagine if, just imagine there would be like an offset. If you could say, OK, you're going to lose, let's just say 2 weeks of holiday a year, but on a daily basis, the kids are going to be easier to teach. They're going to be more pliable. They're going to be more amenable to the idea of education. That would maybe balance things out. You could even shave off a quarter of an hour at the end of the day. Guardian now, Leo, I think it's fair to say the most roundly mocked story on social media today. This is the Black Death.
So, yeah, literally the Black Death. Women with black African ancestry at greater risk when the plague hit London. This is the 14th century bubonic plague. They've done some researchers have done some research. They found that, I mean, they're dealing with pretty small numbers here. Apparently 9 plague victims that they looked at appeared to be of African heritage. The word appeared is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. They basically, because it's skulls or the remnants of skulls, they're measuring eye sockets and things like that.
And it's very important to say they use calipers, but not cranial capacity calipers, which are the single most racist thing you can do is measure the wrong parts.
Yeah. They're using other parts that haven't been judged racist yet. They're probably going to rename the Black Death the People of Colour Death.
Yeah, deaths of colour.
The death of colour, but and it's to push this agenda. They say medieval England was a diverse population. And, you know, they're trying to butter us up for more immigration.
It's always been this way.
And it's always been this, and it really has. I mean, there was immigration in the Middle Ages, but the vast majority was European. It was from countries that were close and similar. There was some, but, I mean, we're an island, so that really restricted the immigration compared to Spain, you know, places like that. And
St. Augustine is the one who told us we looked like angels, and he was from kind of Morocco.
And also, we're not on a trade route, so it's not as if, you know, a lot of people would be coming through like Lebanon or Turkey.
They were after the tin. That powered the Bronze Age Cornwall, but then it went into deep recession around 1100 BC. I think Kemi Badenoch had it absolutely right, funnily enough. It takes somebody like Kemi Badenoch to call this out for the nonsense it is.
Yeah, and you're right to point out the numbers. I mean, there's statistical analysis on like 140 data points. It's all over the shop. And they compared it to the non-plague deaths, which were 8 that looked to be from African heritage and 88 that were white. It's just one small postcode, like 3 different cemeteries.
And where are these? It is a cemetery, is it not? Because I think a lot of the Black Deaths. I mean, Blackheath apparently is a plague burial site.
They were emergency plague burial dumps.
Lime pits.
Yeah.
I think we need to see more research. Radical Haslam in the dock now, Steve. That's not a typo, that is his name.
This is the reasonable for protesters to call Ian Duncan Smith Tory scum, a court rules. So, the High Court has rejected an attempt to overturn the acquittal of 2 protesters. Look, we know he's a Tory, so we can wipe that one off the page.
Yes.
Scum.
Well, he's risen to the surface and stayed stuck to the ground long after he's fought against his purpose, so I think that's probably true as well.
You should have defended him. Look,
I'll defend him.
Do you want to make it illegal to use the word scum? Of all the words, I mean, Angela Rayner would be locked up.
I think it's right on the edge of acceptable. I do think it's funny, you know, sometimes there's sort of dehumanising talk the left complain about, that people talk about. Katie Hopkins was essentially the single worst thing that she ever did was say that immigrants in Libya were like cockroaches. Yeah. So that kind of thing is like dehumanising. Scum, I think, is fine. Some of the language that some of the commentators used about Nigel Farage being in the jungle, that he is being normalised for this is abhorrent, that he needs. Was it not disinfecting? I mean, they do sometimes talk about him in a way that
as if he's some sort of radical imam who's preached genocide. It's nonsense. But I mean, I think you're wrong to say this is just the word Tory and the word scum. This is about protected groups, and if we're going to talk about marginalised groups who get attacked by people, I mean, you can laugh, but look at Joe Cox, look at David Amos, 2 politicians who are attacked for their politics.
Yeah. Well, the security of politicians is a good point. I think you can't ban the phrase Tory scum.
You can't say we can have lots of racism, we'll just provide security to minorities. I mean, that's terrible.
But then look,
is there any suggestion of a physical attack? I think there was.
Well, there was before. So this was someone put a traffic cone on his head. That surely is against the law, at least a parking violation, I imagine. But I take
imitating a wizard.
I take your point about the use of language. The people on the left always say like never kissed a Tory. I've looked into it. The last election, it was like 40% of the vote went to Tories. So there's no way statistically.
Never kissed a Tory on their T-shirt. You never really feel terribly sorry that you've
I'm sure
denied access to
dodged a bullet there. Thanks very much, ladies.
Telegraph, Leo, and the FA are looking to find a resolution to settle the trans issue. I would suggest a low resolution.
So, the Football Association has intervened to find a resolution in the transgender row. This is after at least 4 women's teams in a Sheffield league are refusing to play a team whose transgender player has been accused of seriously injuring an opponent. So apparently this is Francesca Needham. They always pick
Needham, and that's exactly what she does by the look of it. Needham in the Ghoulies.
Yeah, well, Jesus, that's
Francesca Needham.
That's the woman, and she looks like she could bench press. She looks like Hulk Hogan. Anyway, she apparently she accidentally struck a ball against a player's knee, and this has had gravely debilitating effects for the woman in day-to-day life, the player that she injured. And the Rossington ladies team have come out and said that the accident is due to passion and commitment from a very talented player, and not from the fact that they're 150 stone of pure muscle.
It's extraordinary how this amount of delusion carries on, isn't it? I mean, and football, I mean, some of the things we've had, like pool recently, a woman refused to play a transgender opponent in a ladies' pool, and you think, well, that might be a matter of what's the word? Principle for her, and that's fine that she's entitled to do it. But there's probably not a huge advantage in terms of upper body strength. You cannot have men and women playing football together. You just can't.
And
not competitively.
Yeah, and I'm not in this boat, but I would have thought, if you're in a situation where you want to have some right, if you've got all the rights apart from Sunday football, you might take that as a win. But, I don't care about football, so maybe I'm not in either of these 2 boats.
It does seem, I've been saying it for ages, that there were polite fictions in place which everybody was able to live by for an awfully long time, and now suddenly they wanted to close the last 3% of the gap, and everyone's gone, no, I'm sorry, Oh, wait, this is
polite
down.
fictions.
That's the third half down. That's going to be my autobiography, Polite Fictions. That is the third half down. Only the 4th, 5th to go. The 4th, the 5th. I don't know what's going on. Toxic sex toys, furious footy fans, and the death of the patriarchy. It's all coming up. See you shortly.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. For our fourth and final section, we have microplastics news now, Leo, and specifically microplastics in sex toys, which doesn't sound ideal for a couple of reasons. I can think
Don't worry, they put a lot of microplastics in, so it will...
Many a mickle makes a muckle.
It will have some girth. But doctors have found that sex toys made of materials like plastic, rubber and latex can all result in microplastics in the bloodstream as the tiny particles enter your body. I'm glad I took my love eggs out. They cause serious health problems in the long run, like diabetes, immune disorders and metabolic disorders. Obviously, metabolic is what might happen to the sex toy as well. So, but yeah, apparently the sex toys contain phthalates. I'm not trying to spit out a bit of broccoli. That is, mimics a hormone. That mimics a hormone that can affects your hormones.
Lady hormones, yeah.
Bad. So I think we should go to our science correspondent for this.
Yeah, this is terrible news for women.
Yeah.
Because, let's be honest, in the sex toy market,
yeah,
all of them
we
are
use
designed
sex
for women.
tools, don't we?
if it's not got a petrol engine in it, I'm not interested. Yeah. It's basically the only thing men ever get is sex dolls, and they're those weird ones that are on like TV shows like This Morning. Some bloke, I really love her.
I mean,
and
they are always exactly like everything else in AI, exactly a decade away, aren't they? The replacement.
They have to be sent away to be cleaned as well, which is disgusting.
Oh, dear me.
Dear me, no.
You want a dishwasher-friendly one, of course.
Well, maybe they could just like revert to something like ivory or something, you know, that might have been used by the Queen of Sheba. That must be there must be a sort of synthetic
wood.
Rosewood or I don't know, maybe you make your own in. I was talking about this with some mates the other day where I suddenly had a flashback and remembered that my mother used to do something called plasticraft, which was basically when you took anything like a small flower or a gem or something and you encased it in a huge lump of acetate, like clear plastic, and then it became a paperweight or a massively unwieldy cuff.
And then you shoved it where?
And then it was just given as a gift.
Oh,
but it's obviously like everyone should get their plasticraft. I'm not suggesting my mother. Anyway.
Oh,
Steve, Daily Mail now. We've discussed a few possible pronatal strategies on this show, but this is a new one to me.
45,000 women prisoners in Putin's jails should be freed temporarily so they can get out there and get pregnant and reverse Russia's falling birth rate. You've got to feel sorry for the blokes. What an offer. You remember prisoner cell block H? Take your pick. One of those. They're going to need Viagra.
But obviously she's gone back inside. That's good news, right?
Well, that's what happens, yeah. They're out, apparently, released, like...
It's the Dirty Dozen movie.
It's very much But then they've got to go back in pregnant. I imagine give birth in prison, and that's what I call hard labour.
That was how, wasn't it? That was how Anne Widdecombe... that was how she met her downfall, that she wouldn't allow women giving birth in Holloway Prison, I think, to be unshackled for the experience.
Right.
They were, and this was what...
That seems slightly harsh.
Yeah.
They're not going to run away.
Fair. She's a very articulate woman. She's on the channel occasionally, isn't she?
But is the solution to their problem more criminal mothers?
Yeah.
Well, we've got a better solution in Scotland where we send men, biological males, into women's prisons to impregnate the women.
Very good indeed. They should be sent over to Russia. There's a win-win-win. 101 abuses of an FMRI scanner now, Steve. This is football brains.
Yeah, what happens in football fans' brains has been looked at, not a lot, I imagine. They put them in these MRI machines, they show them some football, and the most fanatical supporters, the regions of the... there's some fancy words. Their emotions get the better of them, is the easy way of saying it. Their cognitive powers lose the battle. Again, not a surprise. All of this looks like... I was going to say, why bother doing this amount of analysis? And then on the bottom it says, it could be useful for other areas of life where people are tribal. Oh, you mean all of life now?
Like all of life, yeah. It is interesting, and I know, there's a couple of things that time with this. Oxytocin, right, which is a more female-dominant hormone.
The hug drug.
This is one you particularly get a surge of it when you breastfeed and when you see a little baby and so on. This lowers people's tribal instincts. Oxytocin given to either men or women, and they become much more open to the idea of, mixed communities, diversity and so on. It just lowers all your tribal...
Yeah.
So I think the tribal thing is the kind of male brain thing. And I do genuinely believe that this is why, even though they are forcing us to sort of overcome our instincts, this is why male sport is followed more avidly by men, because they project more... powerfully onto the tribal entities playing in their colours, on their, you know what I mean? Women just don't
fighting vicariously.
They don't get that. Women might watch half a football match before they decided which team they support. You know what I mean? If it's
and
not their own
based on colour.
Yeah. Anyway, so I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but we do it. We do project, and it's also, I think, why people don't understand how. Supporters of Donald Trump, for instance, refuse to accept that he has lost, an election. Because if there's any gap, if there's any opportunity to find an alternative explanation that doesn't involve defeat, you will find it. And this is why it's a very dangerous strategy. Go.
No, he did lose the last one, but he's going to win big in 2024. Don't worry.
I know, it's going to be such pants. Anyway, Leo, on to the Mail now. Following the progressive news from their education sector, it's reassuring to see the Welsh are still capable of backward suspicion and Anglophobia.
So a plan to create a fourth national park in Wales has caused division as local farmers say a vast influx of English tourism mean the country will die. They might be over-egging the pudding a bit. Basically, they fear that the extra footfall will increase house prices, push young people out of their communities, and even harm rare local wildlife. It's interesting. If you said this about another group of people, maybe cross-channel migrants or something, you'd be cast out as a racist. But say it about English people, and it's fine. Obviously, as a Scot, I approve of that rule. Apparently, it's a £4 million annual expense of a national park, and I just think these locals they're not seeing the sort of bigger picture. People bring money with them.
Yeah.
If the house prices go up, that's money coming into the region.
It's true. If they have a sentimental aversion to the English arriving in their country, well, they should just express it as such. But the idea that it will raise house prices and also, destroy the economy. House prices rise when the economy is doing well. That's a pretty basic index, right?
Unless it's people buying a second home, holiday homes, but that's not what we're talking about here. No. It's people going there, visiting, spending their money, boosting their economy.
Absolutely. Well, I hope they see sense. Steve, as someone once said, millions long for immortality that don't know what to do with themselves on a rainy Sunday afternoon. This is in the Times.
The search for longer life could be catastrophic for the planet. I should say early doors. Most of the quotes in here are from a philosopher, so, you know, guessing with big words is what
I love
this is,
his name as well is Dr. Stephen Cave.
Cave,
as
yeah.
Plato's cave.
Yeah, but that makes a good point. If we all live longer, we will use more resources. But it won't be all of us. Get over it. It's like inheritance tax. It's not for you, it's for the rich. Yeah. It's Jeff Bezos is investing it. Of course he is, because if you're Jeff Bezos, the only problem you face is that you're going to die and stop being Jeff Bezos.
It's literally the definition of the elite, isn't it? That they get to live longer, you know. And it is the one thing which they don't currently have the power to do.
Not yet.
I think they're going to go for it. There is that one chap, isn't there? Have you been watching him? A billionaire who is sort of, he's live tweeting.
He mixes his blood with his son's and then pumps it back into both of them. It's a weird sort of vampiric sort of way of doing it.
It's very hard to get older and resist mortality without going crazy.
Yeah.
You know, the oldest epic, the Epic of Gilgamesh, that's the main plot thrust of it, as old Sumerian guy. And he, well, doesn't end well. Anyway.
Spoiler alert.
Steve, sorry, no, this is Leo for our final story of the evening. Would you take your wife's surname? This is, I suppose it would depend whether it was a Leo the Lion or something.
Yeah, I mean, so this is about, would your husband take your surname after marriage? Research shows a third of men would swap to their wife's last name in a growing trend. 35% of men say they would. I don't know if they actually will. Maybe they're just saying it to get some brownie points.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It just seems like, I mean, I hate to...
Brownie points in a marriage has a weird double meaning, but... What can those be traded in for then? But yes.
Well, it used to sound like an antediluvian throwback, but I mean, women should take the man's name. Maybe the double-barrelled one if you're that progressive.
No,
but from
double-barrelled.
At very best, all you'll be taking is her father's name.
Yeah.
It's not her name. It's making up.
Double-barrelled is a bad problem because if you keep having extra generations, it becomes 2 to the power of n-1 barrelled names. 10 generations in, you're up to 500
We have
surnames.
a system. Though. My name is Evans. My wife did keep her professional name, Kate Van Beek, because she wear business cards and so on. Fair enough. But I reckon we can superimpose those names. Kate Evans. See what I mean? Like, we just need some brackets. OK. Show is nearly over. Let's take another quick look at Wednesday's front pages. We'll zip through these. The Daily Mail, terrible, sad story about the 4 pals who went camping. The Guardian, Hunt bows to Tory demands for tax cuts in bid to revive economy and win election. The Mirror, tragic story again of the 4 lads. In the car, Times, Hunt offers tax cuts for workers and businesses. The Sun, so young. Those are those boys again. Never mind the Cliff Richard, that's the Daily Star, and his affinity for the Sex Pistols. That's all we have time for. Thank you to my guests, Leo Kirsten, Steve N. Allen, Andrew Doyle. Excuse me. Back tomorrow at 11 p.m. with Nick Dixon and Lewis Schaefer. If you're watching at 5 a.m, stay tuned for breakfast. If you are now about to turn in for the rest of the night, I wish you happy dreams. See you again very soon. Good night.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And a very good evening. Yes, it's 7 o'clock. It's the Farage Show. He's still down under, so I'm standing in. We've got a massive show. Unbelievable things going on this week. On Thursday, some more net migration numbers are coming out. And guess what, folks? Yes, another surge is forecast. So much for taking back control. Also, here's another shocker. Seeing a GP quickly is easier in Rwanda than here in the United Kingdom. Brilliant. And also another shocker, the COVID inquiry. What's been said over the last couple of days, we'll be getting into that. And of course, what do the Australians, the Aussies think of Farage Down Under? All of that to come, but first, it's the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you very much and good evening. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Police searching for a group of missing teenagers say they've recovered 4 bodies from a crashed car in North Wales. A major search was launched after Javon Hurst, Harvey Owen, Wilf Henderson and Hugo Morris failed to return home from a camping trip in the Snowdonia area on Sunday. Police confirmed their car left the road near Tremadog. Superintendent Owain Llewellyn says it appears to have been a tragic accident.
Shortly after 10 a.m. this morning, a member of the public contacted us reporting a vehicle having left the road between Beddgelert and Llanfrothen. Police officers attended and located a Ford Fiesta vehicle upside down, partially submerged in water. Tragically, the bodies of 4 young males were recovered from within the vehicle.
The national living wage will increase by almost 10%. More than 2 million full-time workers are set to benefit from a pay rise of more than £1,800 a year from next April. The announcement comes ahead of tomorrow's autumn statement. US officials say a tentative deal between Israel and Hamas that could see a pause in fighting and the release of hostages has been agreed. It would see the release of 50 hostages, mostly women and children, in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners and a pause of 4 or 5 days. US President Joe Biden says they're very close to getting those hostages freed. The government's most senior advisor during the COVID pandemic says the plan in place before the pandemic was woefully deficient. The inquiry heard evidence from Sir Chris Whitty today. He said the plan had been drawn up by people who'd been through the swine flu, where the mortality rate was quite low. He also said policy decisions regarding quarantining were difficult. Lancashire Police has been criticised for its handling of the disappearance of Nicola Bulley. A review found failings in the way personal information about Ms. Bully's health struggles was disclosed to the press, which contributed to wild speculation. It said that non-reportable background information should have been provided to the media to help shape responsible reporting without disclosing sensitive information. College of Policing CEO Chief Constable Andy Marsh admitted the way the police released information was needless. And the president of South Korea says his country will work with the UK to bolster the political and economic security in the Indo-Pacific during an address to Parliament this evening. Earlier, the King and Queen welcomed